All right. Hello and welcome everyone to the Devstream 181 breakdown. We have a Tennocon level amount of news and changes that are going to be here exceedingly soon. So let's get into the basics of what we're getting with the next update. First and foremost, the next update is Koumei and the Five Fates. For those of you that have not been paying attention to the little bitty reveals we've been getting on the way to this, Koumei is the new Warframe. Seen here, she is kind of like a gambler shrine maiden type Warframe, seems to be her overall theming, and she looks pretty cool. The update is centered around her, though there's a lot more to it than just her. For that is coming on the 2nd, so it is just a few days away, much less than a week, so we are getting this all very, very soon. Koumei will be coming with the Higasa Umbrella Rifle and the Amanata Polearm. Amanata Polearm seen here. The Umbrella Rifle will have a shield on the front of it and then like a charge shot, basically. Looks interesting. We'll see how powerful the shield is to see if it's going to have any play with that, but it is an interesting a couple of weapons for her that have some RNG effects on them, as she is the Gambler Warframe, but they look interesting. Alongside Koumei herself, which we'll get into more in a moment with what her abilities actually do, we have a bunch of deluxes coming. Volt and Nova are both getting deluxes that also come with a Signa and Ephemera. Honestly, this is like nearly at an heirloom level. These both look absolutely fantastic in my opinion. And Nova in particular in this grouping is getting a complete rework as well as getting this deluxe skin, in addition to the Caliban deluxe and rework with Scythe skin and Ephemera that we already knew the Caliban was getting. Nova is getting arguably more changes than Caliban is, coming from absolutely nowhere, which we're also going to dive quite deeply into. With that, of course, Caliban is here as well, as we have known from prior announcements. Koumei will be coming with a new Invasion Cetus mission called Shrine Defense. It's supposed to be new player friendly. It's going to give Koumei and her weapons and presumably the 5 new arcanes that are launching with this update as well. And it's going to have a new resource called Fate Pearls, which are presumably are like kind of pity currency, so you can just buy things from a shop that would be rewarded from the mission normally. Also, as catch-up for people that don't know, these other things got announced. The mod codex update. This is basically an update that's going to make it so that all mods that appear in the codex will not only tell you where they come from, by default, they'll also tell you what they do, because if you've ever looked in the codex, it's just a bunch of question marks that are absolutely totally useless. So this is changing that to no longer be the case, to be much more, informative. If you go into the codex, you're actually going to gain knowledge instead of just be more confused, which we like to see as a good change. The relic changes that are coming, they've been talked about as if they are new player changes, but honestly, this is an everyone will appreciate this change. Basically, whenever you open or look at a relic, it will tell you item by item which items you have mastered, have built, and don't have yet. So if you look at a relic and it has this is your item that you've opened, it will tell you if you need it or not, is essentially going to be the information you'll get from it, which is just absolutely the best possible change we could ask for on relics, is just for that instant information for what most people are looking for, especially if you are completing a prime collection from a lower amount of stuff that you currently have. With that, we're also getting cross gifting. This is basically just you can gift accounts cross play style. You on PlayStation can gift something to a PC player, so on and so forth. This is probably going to be a thing that is mostly nice for if they're going to do Tennocon this year. But that's just a nice thing that's being added. We're getting some new augments with this update. This is going to be Hildren, Varuna, Grendel, and Geyer, who are all getting augments in this update. Hildren also is getting a partial rework, which is neat. The 5 new arcanes, as I mentioned before. Also, we are getting 3 new galvanized mods that are all going to be melee. We don't have the actual text on them, so we'll see that very soon. Based on the card art, these appear to be galvanized melee prowess, true steel, and reflex coil. Which would be interesting to see. True Steel is kind of a weird choice because obviously we have Sacrificial Steel that everyone gets access to through the quest. But it'll be interesting to see if True Steel can compete with Sacrificial Steel in a galvanized form that kind of needs to stack up and not just be that large crit bonus right out the gate. Also, we are getting new Incarnans. We do not know exactly the vector by which we are getting the new Incarnans. It's probably going to be a new week. It'll be interesting to see whether or not these are going to be offered for Platinum like the last time they added 5 Incarnans. But in this selection, we have the Sestra, the Dara, the Okina, the Sikaris, and the Sybaris. Sicarus and Sybaris, I think, are really good choices here. Those weapons have been popular in the past, and they're ones that people used to enjoy a lot that have kind of just fallen to the wayside. The Dara as well, I would say, falls into that category. The Okina and the Sestra, I feel less strongly about. The Okina obviously recently got a Prime that people are probably just going to incarnate up and have it hopefully be really good. But the Sestra is not a weapon I feel strongly one way or another about, but like the Furus, that could change very, very soon. So I think overall, this is a totally fine selection of new Incarnans. Also, importantly for those of us on PC that play through Steam, there's going to be a bypass password on Steam. For those that don't know what this means, it basically means that if you have your Steam account and it is linked up properly to your Warframe account, you'll just open Warframe and it'll already be logged in. You will not have to log in anymore. It'll just fucking do it, which is, I think, excellent. They're going to be very convenient for a number of people. There's plenty of games that just already do this. It's just kind of a standard feature in a lot of modern released titles that have an account system. And adding that to Warframe is a nice change that I think a lot of people will appreciate. But let me know if you like that though. Like for me, I think that this is like a really neat feature that will be great, especially for just opening Warframe for a quick second. And also if it doesn't show email and password and all that stuff, I won't have to cut away on stream. But that's a me thing. But I think this is going to be more of a boon than a lot of people might think, depending on the player. Now, before we get into Koumei, let's talk about the Caliban, Nova, Hildren, and Wukong changes. With this, for Caliban, because I know most people, probably didn't bother to farm Caliban. He comes from a bad place and also was bad. With Koumei on the 2nd, everyone who logs in for that update is just going to be given a Caliban. You will just have one. So you don't go out and farm him or anything like that. Just log in and you will have a Caliban to try the new rework. That is going to be free for everyone. And notably, the Wukong change here is a nerf. Obviously, I just put out the new Wukong video, and I do think that the nerf to Wukong is very reasonable. It is basically just that for slam attacks, you will no longer be able to just cancel out of the ending animation of a slam attack. You will have to wait until the end of the slam attack in order to go back into cloud form. Some people are freaking out about this. I personally think that it's totally fine. My Wukong was already built to be quite a bit more tanky and can definitely take some hits and just, fly away and heal through your 2 and such, which it just gives you good survivability anyway. This is also, the Wukong build is I've been using the budget version of it for the free-to-play through currently. I'm going to try it on the budget version on the free-to-play through and put out a new video if necessary. If it's totally dead, there will be an update on that. I might have to pivot to another thing that's getting reworked completely for the free-to-play through if that build turns out to no longer be good enough. But I really do think that overall it's going to be more than fine as both a new player build and a longer build as well. It's just going to be the case where you can't just absolutely slam as fast as possible, and you might have to build attack speed into your slam build, which will lower your damage a smidge and increase everything else. So, I think it's overall not going to be a big deal for the Wukong nerf, but let's get into all of the changes that we have. Obviously, over here we have 2 dev workshops to talk about, both provided by Pablo and the community team, and there's a ton in these. There is the whole companion part 2 changes, and there's all these Warframe reworks. I'm not going to go through exhaustively on every single point right in this video. I'm just going to give you guys the broad strokes of what you can expect based on what these changes are and how I think things are going to go. That is what we're going to be talking about here. So more in-depth stuff is going to be for whenever this stuff is out and I can test it and tell you exactly how it does work in practice. But overall, broad strokes on Caliban. Basically, TLDR, his one, or just generally, he's getting a new status type that is going to be unique to him, which is going to be Tau damage and Tau status. The Tau status is going to make it so that other statuses have a much higher chance of being inflicted. And the different damage type doesn't seem to particularly matter, other than it inflicts the new Tau status. Pretty much all of his abilities guarantee that Tau status, which is going to be interesting for his Subsume. But mainly, we have, starting out, his Razor Gyre, which is where he just spins around. Basically, they've changed this to be a large spinning dash. You're going to gain health, and if you're maxed out on health, you're going to gain shields, and if you're maxed out on shields, you're going to gain Overguard. It is 20 per hit, which, unless this has a whole lot of multi-hit now, which is entirely possible, is probably not going to be the best thing in the world for survivability. But it is at least interesting. It's also on hit going to refund some of the energy you spend on it, so it's overall going to be an insanely cheap ability. Also, they've increased the damage of it on enemies that are affected by your 2, which is like a very minor synergy and should be fine. I think overall, this is probably more so going to be like a movement tool with a slight bonus on healing you and stuff, and probably not going to be like a big damage dealer or anything like that, but it's going to be nearly free with the refund on it, and it'll probably be worth spamming to get around. Sentient Wrath has received a total facelift. The basic gist here is that it's no longer like the regular lifted status. It is like the hold lift that you see on certain abilities, where it's like Well of Life just like holds them up in the air and like their whole head is showing for like easy, just like headshots and everything else on them. It's still going to be, it's going to be more damage. It's going to be the same damage vulnerability. It's going to hold them all in place. It's going to have no target cap, which is all very, very solid. It's also going to be recastable, which is also not bad at all. All this bodes very well for it being a pretty decent helmet going forward, and it'll be interesting to see if this has any particular synergies, as it is going to have the Tau status instead of that impact and everything like that. So it's going to be much more vulnerable to status, a damage increase, a better stun that keeps enemies in place, and not have that annoying-ass target cap. So that all seems really, really good, especially in terms of using it on other Warframes, but probably just going to be great on Caliban as well, or at least much, much better than it was. Lethal Progeny has, well, as you can see, maximum amount of changes. This was just Conculus that you could summon one at a time. Now it is 3 different types of sentient that you can choose between, and then summon all of that type that you're allowed to summon all at once. So the broad strokes here: the Conculus no longer give you shields. They're melee. They do more damage now. They'll do their tornado much more often, and most importantly, they will cast your 4 when you do, in the direction that you cast your 4. So if you summon the Conculus out and then use your 4, they will be spamming it at 50% the effectiveness, which is probably going to be pretty effective for damage based on the changes to his 4, which we're going to get to in a moment. The Ortholis, these are some ranged guys that are basically just going to be shooting the Tau damage and Tau status effects all over. They'll have a mortar and a regular shot. Mortar is going to inflict a bunch of that status. Regular shot's going to inflict at least one of that status, which is going to be pretty good. And then you can have 3 of these simultaneously, similar to the Conculus. Then finally, for the survivability section, we have the Sumulist, which is, this is the like portal guy. This is the portal, one of the sentients for those of you that have seen them before. Now, they're relatively rare, but this is basically just going to be summon the portal guy, and then he's going to open up and summon a ton of Coralists that are going to constantly be boosting your shields and everyone else's shields around you. And anytime they die, he's just going to summon more and more and more. The Sumulist is only a 1 of. You're not going to get 3 of this guy, but he's basically just going to just like send out a million of the other little Coralists, which notably have a very interesting bonus, which is that the Coralists are going to force highest possible target priority, meaning that they're going to draw aggro from everything with a guarantee, at least based on this wording. And that guaranteed amount of distraction is a pretty interesting one. But yeah, that's like pretty good. Notably, he's going to have no collision on all of these summons, so it's not going to be a big deal. You're not going to get like blocked by all these summons like being all around if the Sumulist summons a bunch of Coralists. They're not going to get in anyone's way, which is going to be very nice. You'll also be able to see them through walls like with a Venari. And then finally, we have Fusion Strike, which I think is going to be the glue holding all this stuff together. This basically is a huge damage increase. They're reordering when it does the armor strip. The beam touching an enemy does the armor strip, and then the damage happens afterwards, so you will get the benefit of that like defense strip, and then the damage will hit the enemy. In addition to that, it is going to hit multiple times, and its damage is increased like very significantly. Couple that with the multicasting from the Conculus, and I think that this ability has a good shot of being pretty good for clearing out large amounts of enemies, even on Steel Path potentially, but it is going to need testing in play. You're also going to be invincible during the casting of this ability, which is kind of interesting, allowing for like, you know, safe spamming of it in all likelihood. And it's going to be controlled more like Corvex is for. Also, enemies hit by the beam will explode for an additional amount of damage afterward, which is also very similar to Corvex's ability, actually. So yeah, kind of just like maybe an improved version of Corvex's beam, which I think underperformed a bit, although maybe it's the rest of Corvex that underperforms, actually. but I think overall pretty good. The Wukong stuff, as we talked about, like they talk about why they did it here. I think there's good reasoning in here about like why they're nerfing this, which is just that it falls into like disruptive gameplay. I have definitely seen a lot of people be like, this build is like super annoying. I've seen that sentiment a whole lot, like just in terms of in my Twitch chat and stuff like that, and just around all over. Which like for me personally, I didn't think it was annoying, but like, whatever. I've seen the complaint a lot, so I get it. Also, there were some AFK strategies, notably, that I did see kicking around where it was just like macroed it slamming over and over in one spot, which like, you know, would use a similar build to like what I put up, which is like the kind of infinite energy generation variation of that build, which also obviously would be unhealthy if it was kept that way. This will just make it a very, you know, I think this is like a small slap on the wrist overall. It's just like you're going to have to think about the delay. Like if you were running absolutely no survivability whatsoever on your Wukong, you might have to change the build around a little bit to include some survivability so that you don't just die whenever you're in the after effects of your heavy slam that killed everyone in its AoE instantly. I don't know if a lot of people just weren't using the Archititron, but for me, I'm slamming the Archititron down and the, you know, the acolytes or whatever I'm hitting with it just evaporates into ether. So, like, I'm not having any problems where the enemies near me are still near me whenever I slam down. So I think adding, like, just a little bit of friction there is going to be A-okay and not really, you know, put this build in the dirt or anything crazy like that. Children changes, we have quite a few. This is actually, like, a pretty interesting list. So Balefire Charger basically just gets a buff for its max charge shot, that it's going to be a bit stronger on max charge. And that's pretty much the TLDR for what's going on with Balefire Charger. I'll have to see if this actually like is good. Most of the time, like as they state here, the tap fire is just much better. Charge fire, I have little hope for actually surpassing just tap firing still, but trying to buff it is at least, you know, a thing that they should definitely do. The bigger, more interesting changes are on Aegis Storm, where basically you get Balefire Charger for free whenever you enter your Aegis Storm. Aegis Storm is now much faster. I think based on these changes here, it's going to be more comparable to the way that Jade works, which is very interesting. Also, you're going to be like kind of invincible on landing and have like a slam down that should be maybe a little bit more effective. So also you're going to be able to cast like Pillage and such during this now, which is so absolutely needed. So hopefully Aegis Storm can perform much more similarly to Jade's 4 and just generally be better. Because it was a huge underperformer beforehand. It's something I'll probably definitely give a try, but maybe not before other things in this update. And then we come to Nova. Nova has a tremendous amount of changes. And let me be honest here, Pablo has been cooking on the fucking sun. This list of changes came out of absolutely nowhere and is just, I think, perfect. It is going to be incredible. I think Nova is going to like rocket to the top of like playability, or not even playability, just like played amount, because she was already good, but these things just help her so much and like kind of bring everything that she wants to do together in just an extremely smart way. So first and foremost, her passive is going to be changed to enemies killed while slowed have a 15% chance to drop health orbs. Very good if you're running like a Blessing Nova or like trying to do any health orb synergy like with Equilibrium or anything like that. Then enemies killed while they have been sped up have a 15% chance to drop energy orbs, which is of course always useful, and especially so whenever you are hard farming enemies, because you are speeding them up to kill them faster, which we have as a very common use, maybe the most common use for Nova in general. Nullstar is receiving a host of very important changes. It is now recastable by default, no augment needed, which is a phenomenal change. Its base particle count is being increased from 6 to 12, doubling it. And the 18 particles are still needed to maintain 90% damage reduction. So with that, in this video, Pablo states that the damage reduction will also be increased by strength. So increasing your duration increases the amount of particles. Increasing your strength increases the damage reduction that you're going to be getting. So it's going to be much more likely that you have leftover particles and you're still getting to 90% damage reduction if you're focusing more on that duration and strength build. Because you're going to need fewer particles to get to 90% DR, and then you'll have more particles because you started with more already, which is absolutely phenomenal. Also, it's going to like be visually more subtle, but I think that's totally fine because you're very likely to just have way more of them now, and I think that is also a good change. The damage resistance also notably no longer only applies to shield or only applies to health. It is going to apply to both health and shields, which is, of course, stellar and much better for survivability, making it so that you're breaking that shield gate much less often and only on larger hits is great. Also, the damage type is being changed from slash to blast with a guaranteed blast proc, and base null-star damage is being doubled, which is important for the neutron star augment, which is getting quite a bit with it. Recasting this will cause remaining particles to seek out enemies and then replenish the particles orbiting Nova. So this is a single cast that after your first cast, all of the particles will be released, hitting enemies and doing all of that like guaranteed like heat proc plus heat damage, probably also with the blast damage presumably, though of course that needs testing, it's not stated here. One cast for spamming Neutron Star over and over is pretty good. Like Neutron Star was, before it got its light nerf, one of the things that we'd consider over Thermal Sunder for the like helmet system and all that stuff. I think with these changes, at least for Nova, it's probably going to be quite good just as like a clear ability that is going to be similar to Thermal Sunder once again. Obviously, that is going to need testing, but I think it's going to be more in that vein. Pablo showed a video over on Twitter of it being able to like clear steel path level enemies, just like moving from place to place. But that is because of another change that is also being added in that is going to matter for that quite a bit. Antimatter drop is also being changed. So antimatter drop, you only get one now. You can't make the big antimatter swarm for those of us that remember that. But they basically made it so that you cast it, it's slow, you fill it up with damage, and then you hit cast again to send it off and blow some dudes up. I'll be curious to see if the damage on this can keep up. There's actually some stuff I was messing with Nova, where like the damage the damage cap could be increased by strength. So I was messing with some stuff with that for some like interesting Nova stuff, which actually might have been like a background change that snuck in because I noticed it changed like a few months ago at this point or whatever. But now it should be more interesting for antimatter drop. It is going to remove the collision on antimatter drop, so you can't ride it around anymore, which is mostly funny and like totally fine to be changed. But hopefully charging this up can lead to us being able to nuke with antimatter drop relatively easily, as they're also making it easier to charge, which still excludes multi-shot, but that's fine. And then Wormhole. So Wormhole no longer has a duration. Just completely remove the duration off Wormhole just in general. It's also going to have icons that show how many charges you have left for teleporting around, which is really nice. And then holding it is going to show you where the portal will go, which I think is also going to be a very, very nice change. And then finally, and I would say most importantly, Molecular Prime added a tap-hold functionality. Tap it to cast a slowing effect, hold it to cast a speed-up effect. So this means that both Spiva and Slova can coexist on one build. They both need strength now, which means there is going to be one refined build for Nova that can do all of the things we want Nova to do. In addition to that, the base slow and speed effect goes from 30 to 50, so you have a very easy time capping out the 75% speed increase or decrease, which is notably faster than we can make enemies go right now, which is about 60% with that extremely negative strength. So enemies are going to be faster than ever before if you want them to be, which is great. And you can also just like, toggle between the two mid-mission, which is like kind of like nice switch foot thing that some of us messed with Empower as a subsume. Also, the bonus damage multiplier now applies to Overguard health and shields. Before it was only applying to enemy health. So this is absolutely excellent. It's also worth noting, it's nice that this has been added to the ability screen, by the way, just so people have an easier time understanding this stuff. But very importantly, the speed up effect now bypasses Overguard and will just speed up that enemy because it's a buff for them. So also, all of the Xmas and stuff will get to you sooner as well, which is just stellar. Also, killing primed enemies has a 20% chance to proc blast on nearby foes, which is actually maybe potentially interesting for that kind of cascading wave thing that Nova used to be able to do way back in the day. That actually may possibly make somewhat of a comeback, at least maybe at lower levels, which is extremely interesting. Also, Molecular Fission Augment. Nullstar will apply Molecular Prime to enemies struck by its particles. So, presuming that this is going to work with Neutron Star, a double augment build where you use your 1 to molecular prime the enemies instead of using your 4 and being able to apply that in quite a large range pretty, fast and effectively as you are moving through a mission with Wormhole is a real consideration for like a fast, clear, quick mission build for Nova, especially whenever you're also getting like the massive amount of survivability from Nullstar. like a one spam build may like actually be in the cards. So Nova is getting a huge amount of changes that I think are going to be absolutely stellar, and I cannot wait to mess with those. Moving on back over here, let's talk Koumei for a minute, just to give you some like idea of like what generally she's going to do. She is a puppet gambler Yahtzee Warframe. Her passive is one thing, but technically two things, because she has an overall mechanic that I'm considering to be part of her passive for the time being. One is that she's going to have one weapon that's going to rotate that is going to inflict a random status guaranteed. So it'll be like her primary, her secondary, her melee. It'll be one of those. It'll have a random status that it's just going to always proc, which you can build a loadout where that is really beneficial on any of the weapons. And also, presumably, you'll be able to be like, well, I just won't bring a secondary if you just want it to be your primary and your melee weapon, and so on and so forth. It's a pretty effective passive. With that, in addition, she has her overarching mechanic, which are her 5 fates, which are 5d6 dice. Whenever you roll 3 6s, that is a high roll, and you roll whenever you cast any of your abilities. If you roll 3 6s, you get an additional effect on each of your abilities. So your first ability is like these threads that you send out in like a large area. When enemies touch the threads, they get inflicted with a guaranteed random status. Whenever you high roll, it is every status in the game applied to those enemies all at once. Her second ability is extremely interesting, which is you give yourself a challenge to get a decree. So this is not going to be all the decrees in the game. We know that, but which decrees it's going to be is supremely interesting. And like which like ability, like this could be her helmet theoretically, right? Putting kind of like the Duviri stuff into wherever you want it might be very interesting. And it's also kind of only for longer missions, right? Where like you're building up those decrees and stuff theoretically. So it's very, very interesting. Also, the high roll for this one is automatically gaining the decree without the need to do a challenge. Also, what the challenges that you need to accomplish are in order to gain those decrees is also going to be like very interesting, I think. Her 3 is kind of just like a general survivability. You get a bunch of charms around you that basically have a chance to prevent damage. It'll be interesting to see if that is like a complete chance and you can't mod it at all. Hopefully you can mod that to be like very consistent survivability. And then the high roll for it is total invulnerability for the duration of the charms being up. Overall, I'm a little skeptical on the survivability of her 3rd, just because it is a chance to prevent damage on these charms by default. But depending on how modding goes, it could still be totally fine. Her 4th is like, she's kind of a marionette shrine maiden like deal. She basically puts all enemies that she can see in front of her up on strings. She rolls her 5d6, and then enemies get a like amount of status effects equal to the roll, which is very interesting and like, you know, very in theme with her like kind of rolling for damage stuff. And then the high roll for that is that they get max status stacks, and it's in a 360-degree AoE. Now, the notable thing is, what are the chances of rolling 3 6s? It's roughly it's a little over 3% is the answer. So it's not going to happen all the time unless Koumei's dice are loaded, which is entirely in the cards. I think that is entirely possible that we could like get that. But we just won't know until it's actually out and we can do some more testing with it. Overall, I think Koumei looks cool. She's apparently going to be available to like newer players and stuff, which is interesting. It'll be curious to see if she's going to be actually good for new players, like a Warframe like Caliban, or Wukong. Well, Wukong as of now, maybe not as of this update, and Warframes like Zephyr being in the competition for those new players. But yeah, all good stuff. And we're still not done. I know we're like a half hour into this video. It's going to basically be its own dev stream, but we have a lot of companion stuff to talk about. Now, once again, there is an entire workshop for all of the companion stuff. Pablo has been cooking. There is a lot here. As you can see, this is many, and a lot of it literally just needs to be tested. It's all interesting, and I'm going to give you the broad spectrum of my general impressions on the Wave 2 going into the companion changes here. So, to break that down to a much more palatable level, important stuff. We all knew that the Smita was changing. How is the Smita changing? Well, the Smita is changing by giving that fucking ability to every beast. All of them. Every single one of the animal companions is now getting arguably a better thing that is going to be more convenient to use and is just better. So the Smita will no longer have the double resources, double credits. It is going to have triple affinity, which means it'll still be, kind of interesting for leveling and such. But the resources and credits are going to be just separated out into mods, where there's going to be one mod that is 13% for resources and credits, which is about the average amount of time you would have the Smita buff. And then otherwise, there'll be two more mods that are 18% resources only or 18% credits only, that whenever you pick them up, it just doubles them. A nearly 20% chance for double resources is absolutely stellar and going to be an absolute staple of basically all farms going forward. The nice thing is it doesn't completely pigeonhole you into only picking the Smita. It's just you should have an animal companion, which is much more broad and much more open to different builds and what one of those animal companions is good for any given different Warframe. So I think it is still much healthier for the game, but they really didn't remove charm. They just kind of changed where it is. And definitely if you're farming traces, you're going to always have this mod equipped. Also, all those useless claw mods and nonsense where there was no room for in any of the Kavats or Kubros or Vulpaphyla or any of those? Yeah, all of them are getting brand new beast weapons that are going to be automatically added to your account that don't take up any space, which are going to house all of those mods. So mods like Bite, the elemental mods, a host of new mods are all going to live there and not be clogging up your build on your pet, which leaves a lot of room for different things to be put into those slots, some of which are also going to be new. And the beast weapons are going to include a thing that we've been requesting for so long, which is postures for these beast weapons, which is going to include behavior changes and buffs for them, which will include a passive one, which makes it so that your pet will not attack enemies unless they receive a melee attack from an enemy. And even then, it will give them a generic 50% chance to evade all attacks, which is absolutely stellar for those of us that like the Sahasa Kubro and stuff like that and just want our companions to focus on doing their abilities and buffs and to not go into melee range and waste their time. Do I think that there's going to be more reasons for the companions to go into melee range and actually be able to do stuff? Yeah, there's some stuff that actually has potential to be very good at killing a lot of enemies, I think, going forward, and be more similar to the Verglass, which they had as a desire that the Sentinels would just generally be more useful along with the Beasts and Hounds and all that stuff, which sounds great and also cascades very well into our Sentinel weapon rework, which is basically just a ginormous list of buffs and or complete reworks to various Sentinel weapons, making them much, much more compelling. We're talking about having stuff like basically an Amprex that you can strap to any one of your Sentinels, and all kinds of crazy stuff, like launching mines that affect a very large area that always inflict status, and all kinds of interesting effects that are going to be on those weapons. Now, again, you can go check out the actual big dev workshop that's there if you want to see exactly what every little change is going to be. I'm going to be spending a extremely, extremely large amount of time testing all that stuff, but there is a lot there. And then companion precepts. So a ton of companion precepts are going to be receiving changes or total reworks, and there's just a few that I wanted to mention here because I think that they are kind of the more relevant ones that are going to be more interesting right off the bat and are definitely very easy to evaluate and don't need me to mess with them in game to really feel like I know what's going on with them. And those are 3 extremely notable buffs and 1 extremely notable nerf, mostly for one Warframe, but still definitely seeming like a nerf. The buffs are Scan Matter. Scan Matter from the, this is for Oxalis. This is basically going to make it so in a 60-meter radius, Oxalis will automatically open and give you the contents of resource containers. As a passive effect, that is very, very good. Just constantly giving you resources from a 60-meter radius that you never have to interact with that are automatically picked up just is very, very good. I am curious if this is only resource-specific containers like the Plastids containers and stuff like that, or if it is any container in that AoE, but it happens once every 3 seconds, which is pretty good, and I think that it is going to be just very nice for just general use if you don't want anything else, if you just want resources, if you just want to run through an exterminate mission and get a ton of resources from wherever. I think it's going to be really nice for just passively generating a lot of resources, which is very cool. Negate, which is a mod unique to Worm. This is going to be affected by Manifold, so its cooldown will be reduced by the Manifold Bond effect, which is only notable because that is like even closer to like complete status immunity, really, if you're using Worm. Worm also is able to utilize like Reinforced Bond and Tenacious Bond simultaneously alongside that, so a very useful Sentinel build to have around. And then Looter. So Looter, right now, this is a unique mod for Carrier, and what it does now is basically like Carrier will open a crate that you can see in a very small radius. It's going to be up to 22 meters, but we don't know if it's going to lose that line of sight restriction. If it loses the line of sight restriction, it'll break all of the containers in like a 22-meter radius around you, which is pretty good. Like, it's kind of like a miniature box breaker, not as good as something like, you know, Zephyr or Zaku or anything that's been specifically made in order to break all of the containers in a level and, like, you know, collect all this stuff. But that on a miniature level is just generally useful, and similar to Scan Matter, could absolutely see a good amount of use for just like generically farming stuff as like a kind of like, you know, and, you know, just generic companion just to have with you all the time, especially if you're using like, you know, very high ammo volume weapons. You might want to have more ammo for, which Carrier also helps with. And then the notable one that I think is a big nerf, the Sly Vulpaphyla has had its ability completely reworked. It was one of the ones that was, I felt, very good, that gave you a lot of dodge chance. It's being reworked into a thing that like spawns a clone sometimes with like a 5-second cooldown, which just seems completely worse in every way. So we might be kind of losing the Sly Vulpaphyla, which is a bit unfortunate as it's the common, easier to get one, especially for newer players. But overall, that seemed like kind of the only one that seemed like a definite like loser of the bunch. There's a lot of other stuff that they seem to be trying that I don't think it's all gonna, like, you know, bring everything up to like, you know, Nautilus or like Worm or, you know, any of like the kind of top end right now, you know, like Diriga and stuff like that. I don't think it's gonna bring them all up to that, but it's gonna at least put them closer, which is of course what we want to see. Finally, some 1999 news. This is going to be basically October 16th. There's going to be an in-game demo mission for all players that is going to award the sword cosmetic that Arthur uses. So that is upcoming. Also, they showed off some concept stuff for the line animation for Warframe, which is just going to be some, you know, like kind of anime that we're going to get for Warframe around the launch of 1999, which should be great. But yeah, that's going to do it for this absolutely jam-packed Devstream 181. Absolutely, like, full to the brim. Did not expect to get this much information from a Devstream. It is, like, truly Tennocon 2 of the year. I don't think we're going to see one like this for the rest of the year, at least, because there is just so much here, and it is all going to be here so soon. With that, thank you all for watching. Much appreciated. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I will see you tomorrow.
All right, we're back from Tennocon, and the streamathon is going to continue. But there will, of course, I will try and have there be videos as well as the streamathon at the same time, if I can. Also, thank you to the $10 patrons: Athean, Alex Parnham, Arbiter Daydream, Benuven, Fruta Salazar, Canalafra, Club World 3, Dylan Dworsky, Athrain, Hafan, James Hearthstone, JC4 Science, Josh, Lou Zanth, Malik X Williams, Mark Smith, Mikakel, Minty Ginja, Mitchta, Nerve, Ruby, Sanyu, Skur, Sharp247, Tamrielic Wastelander, Tester ZWP, The Coupon of Death, Comeworm, Victor Palmer, Waifu Wars, Wowdata1, and Sarah Fear, and of course all of my other patrons as well. It is incredibly appreciated for all of your support. But yeah, we're gonna try and keep the videos a little bit more regular while the streamathon continues. And of course, we do have a free-to-play through coming soon.